So we've got more breaking news coming out in the world of college admissions and standardized testing. This one is brought to us by the New York Times. They just released an article saying that the University of Texas at Austin is now going back to its old standardized testing requirements, making all students submit either an SAT or an ACT score in order to go to school there. With the subheadline of the New York Times article here being that the university is saying that these scores help them best place students into the programs that are best fit for them. And now going through the rest of this New York Times article for the details, they tell us stuff that we already know, which is that 2,000 colleges began moving away from these test scores a couple years ago amid concerns that they were fueling inequality, and also because a lot of students couldn't take these tests due to pandemic closures and everything like that. But now we're getting to the point of the pendulum swinging the opposite direction, with a bunch of schools recently just announcing that they're going back to requiring these test scores. And among those schools, they include Brown, Yale, and Dartmouth as ones that have recently done this, as well as schools like MIT and Georgetown, who went back to the standardized testing requirement a decent bit ago. However, UT Austin actually brings up a couple new points that we haven't heard before for why they're bringing back these test scores. So the article says that without requiring test scores, officials said that they were hampered in placing the admitted students into programs they're best suited for, and also in determining which students would need extra help. And so now the school is announcing that they're bringing back these test mandatory policies immediately. Starting August 1st, all new applicants to the school will have to submit test scores along with their application. And so there is a pretty important quote here from the president of the university. He actually said that we looked at our students and we found that in many ways they weren't faring as well with regards to the students who did not submit their test scores. So that pretty much directly tells us what a lot of the other schools were saying as well, which is that students who don't submit test scores just don't actually do as well in college with regards to GPA, with regards to transferring, with regards to being as satisfied with their educational opportunities on that campus. And so continuing further down into this article, we get another good piece of information from this. Those against standardized testing requirements have long said that standardized tests are unfair because many students from affluent families use tutors and coaches to bolster their scores. But recent data has raised questions about the contention. In reinstating test requirements, some universities have said that making scores optional had the unintended effect of harming prospective students from low-income families. A lot of times we just have unintended consequences that we don't actually get to see until the data actually comes out. So it's really good that the schools are starting to release this data and starting to actually look at it after the past couple of years and making the right determination here that they're actually helping students more from low-income families when they are requiring them to submit these test scores. But getting into the next part of this article, the University of Texas at Austin actually has a little bit of a unique perspective here. So UT Austin actually automatically accepts all students from the state of Texas who graduate in the top 6% of their high school classes. And among all the students from Texas admitted to the university, 75% are regarded as these automatic admits. So other Texas students as well as out-of-state students are evaluated through a holistic admissions process that does include the standardized test scores. So for those students, it actually will not change too much with the policy here. But in the admissions process for last year, 42% of students opted to submit their test scores. So 58% actually did not submit test scores. But the most interesting piece of this is that almost all of these students that are going to UT Austin have perfect 4.0 grade point averages. And the provost of admissions is quoted as saying there's just not a lot of variation there between the GPAs, adding that the test scores provide more granular information that helps determine placement. And this is another thing that colleges actually haven't really come out directly to say, but a lot of colleges are now concerned about grade inflation in high school, where basically every single student graduating from high school has something like a 3.9 or a 4.0 GPA. So there's really no way to tell whether a student is actually capable of succeeding on campus there by just using GPA alone. When every student gets an A in their high school classes because the teachers just want to shuffle them along and don't necessarily want to hear complaints from parents, this causes a lot of problems with using GPA as the sole factor in determining admissions. And this grade inflation is just one more reason why we're going to see a lot more schools going back to these standardized testing requirements in the next couple years. And now getting into some of the data that UT Austin actually released, this is pretty interesting because a lot of these other schools haven't actually released the data itself. But UT Austin says that according to the university's figures on its current first year class, so that's the current freshmen who are there right now, there were 9,217 students admitted, and students who submitted test scores to the school were 55% less likely to have a first semester GPA below 2.0. And so what we've been speculating is that students who submit test scores to these colleges end up doing a lot better GPA-wise, but this actually gives us hard data on what the numbers are. So students who submitted test scores were less than half as likely to be failing their classes during the first semester, which is a crazy statistic to think about. And similarly, for those students who did submit test scores, had higher GPAs by a significant margin, an average of 0.86 GPA points higher than students who did not submit test scores. That's almost a full point on the GPA scale. So imagine one student who didn't submit test scores had a 3.0. On average, you'd expect that the student who did submit test scores had a 3.86 GPA. That's a huge difference, and it's pretty startling when you actually look at the statistics like this. So looking at the data here that they actually released, it seems like students who submitted test scores were significantly more likely to have success than students who didn't submit test scores. And if the statistics are anywhere near this severe at other colleges in the US, I think it's only a matter of time until most, if not all, other schools start bringing back these test mandatory requirements. So if you're a high schooler right now, you need to be prepared to do well on these standardized tests, because we're gonna probably have to submit them in order to get into colleges.